Every time I read about Solomon, and I have this chip on my shoulder about Solomon that you'll soon find out why. I think about this, I guess it's a joke, really. It's about three guys in a plane, and there's the pilot, there's the Boy Scout, and there's the smartest guy in the world. And the plane has some trouble, and they have to abandon ship, but there are only two parachutes. So the smartest guy in the world, he grabs one, and he yells to the other two in the plane. He says, "The world needs me," and he leaps out into the sky. And the shocked pilot, he looks at the poor Boy Scout and he says, "Don't worry, son, you can have my parachute." "No worries," the scout said. "The smartest guy in the world just jumped out of the plane wearing my backpack." Now, I tell you that because I know of many smart guys who are jumping out of planes, out of windows, off buildings. They feel that their intellect and their education and their wealth and their success will save them. They're a lot like Solomon. Solomon, they say, was the smartest man in the world. Quite a title. Solomon was David's son. David was the famous king that united Israel for that short time period in history. And then when David died, as we read last week, he slept with his ancestors, his fathers. Solomon took over his reign. But right after Solomon died, the kingdom collapsed, and it divided into civil war. So I don't think that Solomon's kingdom was all that great, not like David's. Let me give you some history. The first book of the Bible is Genesis. Yes. It is a book about beginnings. That's what Genesis means, beginnings. Where, according to the poet who wrote that account, God walked with human beings in the garden in the cool of the evenings. And after some of these long, hot days, we'll kick off our shoes, and Christy and I and Sam will take the dogs in our backyard, and we'll walk in the cool of the evenings. And we'll watch the setting sun shroud the treetops with its special soft light, you know, that light of dusk that makes everything look as if God painted it with huge brushstrokes from his divine palette. It is his cathedral. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts, to me. In the second book of the Bible, we come to Exodus, and we move from the garden to Egypt, which is the main attraction. Egypt is an empire. It is a domination system. It is built on the backs of Israelite slave labor. And it's built brick by brick. And in their suffering for hundreds of years, the Hebrews cry out to God. And God says, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people. I have heard their cries. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them." A God who sees and hears. That's what the book of Exodus is all about, and how God responded to the cries of the Hebrews in the mud pits of Egypt. And God does something. God rescues them. You know the story. Charlton Heston, his long gray beard, and the hairless Yul Brynner. We've all seen the movie. So let it be written. And then there's this long pause as Yul Brynner stands there in his golden diaper mini skirt. So let it be done, he says, and he walks out of the room a whole while Ann Baxter's doing winky blinky eyes at Moses. God liberated the Hebrews. Think about your life. What are the moments that have shaped you the most? If you were to pick a couple of periods of transformation as you look back in your lives, times when your life has opened up and there are times of growth and self-discovery and strength, what would they be? How many of them came to you when you had reached the end of your rope? When everything else fell apart, when you were empty or broken or wounded, when there was nothing left to do but to cry out. That old ancient story of Egypt and in the Exodus is still true, because for many people it is their cry, it's their desperation, their acknowledgement of their oppression that is the beginning of their liberation. God delivers them. And if you stick with it, if you and God work through it, the actual pain and suffering that you once experienced will become the very channel through which God's love will flow to others. Your pain becomes the channel of hope to others. The mess your life was becomes the message your life is. Which, of course, is what happened to me. My walk through the desolate valley, as our psalm says, became a place where I found the springs of new life. So don't give up, and don't ever doubt. God hears the cry of his people. Now, after Exodus, God gave the Hebrews the 10 Commandments, and they wandered around the wilderness for about 40 years. GPS hadn't been invented yet. They had some trouble with the neighbors, the neighboring villages and towns. But eventually they settled in the land of Canaan, which is Palestine. And after a period of judges and prophets, about 1000 BC, a young man named David, who was a shepherd, became the famous king. And if we read the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, if you have insomnia some night and you can't get to sleep, you just read that, you'll see that it'll say that Jesus is a descendant of David. He is his ancestor. Last week we read that David died. Solomon was the son of David. Now Solomon is king. And they paint him to be such a saint. God asked Solomon, what he wanted. You can have anything, Solomon. What do you want? And Solomon, he says, I want wisdom and understanding to rule my people. He stands there looking holy and pious, his hand on his heart, little halo over his head, boys' choir in the background. But he wasn't what he appeared to be. And I think of my friend B, who's no longer on this earth, but is in another place. I used to visit her at a medical facility. Every month we sang some songs there, and she seemed to be such a saint to me, an elderly woman, B. And one time I asked her, I said, B, you're such a beautiful person, and you don't seem to have any enemies, and you never say anything bad about anybody. How do you do it? And B replied, because I outlived the dirty rats. God bless you, B. Solomon isn't as he appears to be. God grants him wisdom, and he gives him wealth too. But what did Solomon do with his wisdom and wealth? He built a temple, as we read. He built a box to hold God. And Solomon built a kingdom, didn't he? What kind of a kingdom? The Bible tells us he used forced labor to build the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. Solomon used slaves to build the Lord's temple. The same Lord who set slaves free. Ironic, ain't it? He uses slaves to build the temple, and he built a palace, and he built his wives' houses and other buildings too, and he built military bases, and he accumulated 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses he imported from Egypt. He's a long way from the halo over the head. Solomon's heart was not devoted to God. It was devoted to honeydew lists, because he had 700 wives and 700 mothers-in-law. The smartest man in the world was a nut. He celebrated 2 anniversaries every day with imported champagne from Idaho. Was he the king God wanted? Was he maintaining justice? Did he rule wisely? Did he hear the cry of the oppressed? No, he did not hear it. He caused it. Which brings us to another son of David. In the Gospel of Matthew, a Canaanite woman cries for the healing of her daughter to Jesus. Son of David, she cries, help us. In the Gospel of Mark, a blind man hears a crowd and cries out for Jesus, calling him the Son of David. He says, I want to see. In Luke, a beggar in the streets tries to get Jesus' attention, and he calls out, "Son of David, have mercy." And Jesus hears their cry. This Son of David is not like Solomon. Jesus is headed for Jerusalem. All the while he's preaching about a God who is not in a box, but everywhere. And he's preaching about a kingdom that is here, and yet it transcends this earth. It is a kingdom where power is flowing through Jesus to the broken and the blind and the captives, those who need it most, those who do not have any power. A kingdom that gives us meaning and value. Why? Because Jesus told us everything we do is witnessed by God and heaven. He taught us that life is enormous, that the world is headed somewhere, and that death is not the end. It is only the beginning. And he showed people that God's temple is more than merely bricks and beams, but it's everywhere and it's anywhere. There is love, anywhere there is life, and there is reverence, and there is gratitude. Anywhere there is worship happening. And that temple, that cathedral, that kingdom is bigger and wider and large enough for the whole world to fit into. And when we do our part, no matter how big or small, we are making that kingdom a reality. Now I want to end with something that I read about a little town in Minnesota, right on the North Dakota border line, state line. And there's this church, and every year they anticipate their annual Christmas concert. And every year, the people in that community, they all get together, from all over the town, and they create this unique background for the choir to stand in front of to sing their concert. It's a picture. It turns out to be a big mosaic picture. And it's 100 feet long, and it's 30 feet high. And what they do is in the summer they begin and they make this design for this picture, this mosaic. And then they hand out these tiles, and they're all numbered, and 1,000 people from junior high to senior citizens, they paint what that tile is supposed to be. They paint by number on thousands and thousands of tiny square tiles, little pieces. And day after day, month after month, one little piece at a time, they collect them and they categorize them, and eventually they set them in place. And when the mosaic is done toward Christmas time, it looks like this huge stained glass window. And the weekend of the concert, the people who helped paint those tiles, they arrive early, and you can hear them whispering to the people who are with them. They'll say, "You see that little green spot right there by the camel's foot? I painted that one there. You see that red spot on the cheek of Jesus' face? I did that one there. I painted it." Each one of them, they're ordinary people like you and me. They paint little tiny tiles. In a few months later, it's a giant, spectacular painting. And the point is, our tiny choices, our small acts of kindness and of faith, our little prayers, and the things that move us to be more like Jesus, they may not seem like much to us, but someday you and I will stand together in the great cathedral of heaven, and up in front by Jesus will hang a magnificent mosaic, one that we could even hardly imagine, made up of thousands and millions of tiles, which are our responses to God's love in our lives. That is the kingdom of Jesus, David's other son. And his new temple, it is you. Amen.